Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at working with spark timing and the basics and fundamentals of spark timing in this training module. The next few tutorials, we'll be digging into then how to set up and tune main spark timing table, spark timing modifiers, knock control, and all the important details so we can properly calibrate our spark tuning. Also go through some examples throughout the next few tutorials at what to look for in terms of tuning and calibrating spark timing. So there's a lot of little details here we want to understand. Really, the idea behind this tutorial is getting into the fundamentals. What is going on when we're commanding the spark event to happen so we understand conceptually as to what's going on and we're not just moving numbers up or down in the table. We know more of a conceptual level as to what we're actually doing. I find that most people, when they get started calibrating and tuning, spark timing is one of those kind of gray areas that people get often confused in setting up the table values and actually calibrating them. It's actually really easy, but we definitely want to understand what we're doing and what's going on. So that's what we're going to try to break down here in this tutorial. So let's move here from our field tuning page and let's jump over into our Spark tuning specific page so we can see what's going on here. So I'm going to move from our field page over here to Spark. Now in our Spark page, we're going to find that we have a lot of different windows and different variables and parameters to take a look at spark timing as to what's going on with it. What we're going to do here is just keep things really simple in this tutorial. I'm offline right now from the link, so we're just looking at the file here and just looking at the values in the table. We want to understand what the values represent, and then we'll start to introduce more and more things within the spark tuning routine so you understand what's going on. I don't want to make things overwhelming here, right? For this tutorial, I want to just make it really simple. So let's jump into our spark timing table and understand what this actually represents. So looking here, we find our ignition table 1. This is known as the main spark timing table. This is where we command the spark event to happen at. So if we look at the table, it's based on map pressure versus engine speed. Now we can change the load input here. It doesn't necessarily have to stay at map pressure. It can be based on throttle position if you're doing an alpha end tune, or it could be based on MGP, manifold gauge pressure, as we find our main fuel table is set up typically for MGP. Map pressure is completely acceptable for setting up and working with our spark timing, and you find most base files from Link will have the main spark timing table set up as map pressure based. Regardless, it doesn't really matter in terms of the axes right now because, again, we're focused on the table values. But just note that the table here is set up map pressure versus engine speed. Now, we're going to get into setting up the tables, how to go in and actually configure the tables based on our application, force induction, naturally aspirated, whatever we're going to be tuning in the next tutorial. That's more of a kind of a setup and getting more familiar with actually calibrating the table. Right now, we're just focusing on the fundamentals. So if we look at the table values, let's pick a point in the table. So let's assume the engine, it's running here at 3,000 RPM, 60 kPa of manifold pressure. And let's take a look at the value here. That's 35 degrees. 35 degrees, and if we note here, a positive value is going to be degrees before top dead center. A negative value in the table here, none of the values are actually negative in this particular example, but a negative value means that we're commanding a spark event to happen after top dead center. Now, that probably makes absolutely no sense to you at this point. Let's break this down a little bit further so we get more familiar and comfortable with this particular units that we're dealing with before top dead center or after top dead center. The easiest way to explain spark timing is to take a look at a 4-stroke example, going through all the different strokes and then seeing where the spark timing fits in and understanding then what the table value actually represents. That's the easiest way to make things click here. So let's take a look at a nice example I have coming up on screen of a 4-stroke engine so we can better understand spark timing. Taking a look at this particular example, we're going to find it's a cutaway of an overhead cam engine. Dual overhead cam, intake and exhaust cams, we have intake and exhaust valves, intake and exhaust ports, and then we find we have our cutaway where we're going to see the piston rod and crankshaft. So this is just a kind of a cutaway. If you imagine an engine, take a cylinder, slice it right in half, and that's what we're looking at here in this tutorial, just kind of getting a visual reference here. Now, looking at the actual beginning of our intake stroke, we're going to find the intake valve is going to actuate open, and we're going to have the fuel and air mixture starting to slowly draw its way into the combustion chamber, into the cylinder. Now, that's going to continue as the piston travels downwards towards bottom dead center, somewhere in the point where it reaches bottom dead center, and the point where it starts to transition and go back up to top dead center on the next stroke, the compression stroke, we'll find that the intake valve is going to close. So what's going to happen now is the piston's going to change direction, and it's going to go travel towards top dead center. In the point where it's traveling upwards, it's starting to compress the fuel and air mixture. This is going to create the ability for a large combustion event to happen and giving us a lot of cylinder pressure so that we make more horsepower and torque out of the engine, or we make horsepower and torque out of the engine. So it's going to start to compress the fuel and air mixture here. Now, somewhere between the point where it's traveling upwards to the point where it goes and reaches the top of its travel known as top dead center, we're going to typically fire our spark plug off somewhere in that particular range. Now in this example, we can see here, once the piston is almost at top dead center, that's going to be where the spark event is commanded in this example. And then as a result, the spark event happens, the piston starts to travel downwards, and the next stroke, the combustion stroke, towards bottom dead center. And we can see that's going to create a huge flame front and a pressure wave that's going to go help that piston and rod push downwards on the crankshaft to produce more horsepower and torque out of the engine. Now, Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.